Hello and welcome to this small tribute to chess grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, who passed away recently at the age of 29. And hopefully he's playing all the greatest chess players in heaven, like Paul Morphy and Bobby Fischer and Capablanca and all of them. But I, I've definitely heard of Daniel Naroditsky, of course. But I didn't realize how good of a blitz player he was. So here's a game that I thought I would go through here, do a little review where Daniel Naroditsky this year in 2025, he played against Magnus Carlsen, the highest rated, the best chess player in the world. And it looks like Daniel Naroditsky played at 93.3% accuracy versus 82.3 by Magnus. And this game, it was a 3-minute blitz game, I believe. And they had, I think, 1 second added per move. All right, let's take a look at it here. I'll turn on the computer analysis so we can take a look at that while we're going over this game. Daniel had the white pieces, and he begins with e4, an aggressive attacking move against the number one player in the world. And Magnus plays g6 here, a flexible move where he's going to develop his bishop, aiming it through the center down towards the queen side. So instead of placing pawns in the center, he just develops a piece to help control the center. And maybe the downside to this move is that it immediately allows the center to be taken with both pawns. Magnus pushes his d pawn here, giving him the option of potentially pushing either one of his e pawn or c pawn forward to counterattack here. So the game continues with the knight developing to help fortify the center. And now we have Magnus pushing another pawn here. So maybe switching gears or keeping himself flexible. Also, this prevents the knight from jumping forward or the bishop as well. And he still has the option now of pushing this pawn, trying to help control the center. So the game continues with Daniel grabbing up more space here, pushing another pawn. And we have, this is the modern defense, rat defense, accelerated, I won't try and pronounce that name, but Gurganides maybe, variation. So we have d5 played by Magnus. And so now this allows Daniel to push forward, gaining more space, really controlling the center with this pawn formation, this triangle in the middle. And the game continues with Magnus pushing the h-pawn, because when the center is kind of blocked up like this, you have to play on the flanks. Either trying to push the c-pawn at some point, or just gaining space over here like Magnus has done. And so the game continues with knight developing. Magnus pins the knight to the queen. So now we have Magnus developing his own bishop, and he's ready to castle on the king side if he chooses to. And because the bishop is outside the pawn chain now, this pawn pushes forward, and we have Daniel developing his bishop, perhaps with the intention of maybe going for queenside castling. So the game continues with knight pushing forward here, and now an attack with h3 on the bishop. So will the bishop retreat? Will the bishop capture? Let's find out. That is ignored in favor of a counterattack. So now we have the knight here aiming at Daniel's dark squared bishop, perhaps thinking about getting rid of the bishop pair. So the game continues with the best move, a retreat, covering all of these squares that the knight could potentially jump to. And now we have a capture here. So Magnus gives up his bishop pair. It does help the queen develop, and now Daniel can develop, or excuse me, castle queenside if he would like to. Now, Magnus gains more space here by pushing this H pawn. It kind of potentially allows the knight to jump in here, harassing the bishop, or excuse me, harassing the rook, and maybe enticing Daniel to get rid of his bishop pair by capturing. But that would give up a pawn. So the game continues with the light squared bishop giving itself up. Magnus recaptures, doubling pawns. He captures towards the center. Now the G file is open, potentially for the rook to start eyeing this pawn. So what does Daniel do? He just goes for castling on the queen side. An inaccuracy, according to the computer. A4 was preferred, just gaining space over here. But the game continues, and it's pretty interesting how quickly these players must have moved. With 3 minutes on the clock, Magnus still is at 252, and Daniel is at 247 after how many moves? 13 moves. So they're moving pretty quick here in the opening. The game continues with Daniel trying to get some play over here on the king side, and Magnus captures en passant. We have a recapture with the bishop, and space gaining move with b5 here, possible threat to the knight. So that's ignored. The king steps to the b file, which is a common move when castling to the queen side. A lot of masters will place the king on the b file. This helps, possibly cover this pawn. It gets the king out of the line of fire because a lot of times the c file will be half open and they could line a rook up on the king. So now we have knight jumping forward here to b6 with the potential to jump into this outpost here. Also eyeing the a4 square, preventing the knight from jumping forward, if this move is played. So knight drops back, and Magnus goes for some more space here on the queen side, starting a little pawn storm towards Daniel's king. And so the game continues with a counter thrust over here on the king side. The passed pawn is running up the board, so we have knight to the outpost on c4, and the best move, h5. That passed pawn is just running up the board. Magnus counters with the best move of a4, getting closer to Daniel's queen side over here, heading towards the king. And now a defensive move, dropping back here with the knight, maybe with an idea of running the knight up and onto the outpost in the future. So the game continues with a pawn push, and that may have been the first mistake of the game played by Magnus. That shifts the game in white's favor by quite a bit here, almost 3/4 of a pawn's worth of material. The computer preferred instead a5. Just lining up with a rook-queen battery. And that might be another reason that this knight has dropped back here to help defend that in case that opened up. So the game continues with capture. The bishop is capturing and developing here at the same time, grabbing this open diagonal. And so now we have knight moving forward, attacking the unprotected bishop. So the bishop, instead of retreating, dives into the heart of Daniel's position. It is protected by the knight. So maybe there's another threat of jumping forward here, forking the queen and the king. So what does Daniel do? He counterattacks the bishop. A missed opportunity. Apparently a3 would have been better. Pushing this forward, preventing that pawn from running up even further on the A file. So the game continues with queen and bishop creating a battery. So now this move the computer says is an inaccuracy. It preferred what? Bishop immediately taking on f2. Now we have a mistake, the first one by Daniel here. He captures the bishop. Now the clock is running down a little bit more, but we still have, for a 3-minute game, they still have 2/3 of the time left here. And instead of that move, they preferred what? Bishop to e1, retreating back and preventing that knight from jumping in here. So the game continues with queen recapturing, and instead of trading, Daniel retreats his queen. Now maybe there's a threat of moving up here, attacking the unprotected rook. So the game continues with the king move, the best in the position. At this point, Daniel is ahead by the equivalent of half a pawn, even though material is even at this moment. So now we have the knight jumping forward here. Game continues with a blunder by Magnus. So it's not quite a game-losing blunder, but in a blitz game like this, a blunder can make a big difference. So what should have been played? It looks like queen to e4 is preferred. Just attacking the queen. If they exchange, then Magnus would have a passed pawn on e4. So after this blunder, the game continues with the brilliant rook sacrifice here found by Daniel. The problem is, if you take that rook, then the knight will recapture, forking the king and the queen and grabbing that queen there. So Magnus plays a mistake here that leads to a mate in 4. He attacks the queen, and let's see, what is preferred? It looks like, once again, e4 is the best move, counterattacking the queen. So the game continues with rook to d7, the best move, forcing that king to capture or run. There's no blocking when they're side by side like that. The best thing is to take, and that leads to a mate in 3. If you go, let's see, king to b6, well, then what do you have? It looks like queen to b7 leads to mate, and an even quicker mate would be king to b8, because that just allows the immediate queen to b7 mate. So in the game, we have capture, queen checks, and now the only moves are king to e8 or d8. So king to e8 is played, check, and mate. So it was a blitz game, so things happen in blitz games, but outstanding game by Daniel Naroditsky. And if he's playing like this, he'll give Fisher and Capablanca and Morphy, all of them, a run for their money. Hopefully they're playing a tournament in heaven. So in remembrance of Daniel Naroditsky, a great chess grandmaster, may he rest in peace. So I hope you all enjoyed this little game review of Daniel versus Magnus, which was played this year, I think back in the summer, maybe in June. Well, feel free to leave comments, like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. And here's again remembering Daniel Naroditsky, who died in 2025 at 29 years old. he probably still had much more to give to the chess world. So God bless. Thank you and have a super chess day.